Good morning, I am John Mutchler, the pastor of the Ferndale Alliance Church, and it is Good Saturday or Holy Saturday. It's the day between Good Friday, where we remember the crucifixion and death of Jesus Christ, and Sunday or Easter Sunday or Resurrection Sunday. So what happened on Saturday is what we're going to talk about today. And I want to give you two words to remember as we do our talk this morning. The word finished or complete finished, and the word rest, and related to the word rest is the word Sabbath. In fact, the word Sabbath comes from the word to rest, or to cease from our activities. I want you to remember those two words. Today is the Sabbath day for the Jewish people and for some Christians. A lot of Christians celebrate Sabbath on Sunday. We're not going to talk about that today. We need to simply recognize that Saturday was the day of ceasing work, of rest for the people of God some 2,000 years ago. I want to read this morning a little bit of the account of Jesus' crucifixion, which took place on a Friday afternoon. It's in John chapter 19, beginning at verse 28. And again, remember those words, finished and rest. It says that while he was on the cross dying for our sins, and knowing that everything had now been finished, verse 28, so that the scriptures would be fulfilled or completed, Jesus said, I am thirsty. And a jar of wine vinegar was there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put the sponge on a stalk of the hyssop plant, and then lifted it to Jesus' lips. Jesus was thirsty. I suspect he wanted to say something, and that just parching his thirst helped him out a little bit. And so he drank a very sour, bitter concoction. And it says in verse 30 that when he had received this drink, Jesus said this, three words, it is finished. And with that, he bowed his head and he gave up his spirit. He gave up his breath. It's a nice, pleasant way of saying that he died, that he passed away. And then he then entered into death, sleep, or rest. Now, during those days, it says that the Jews did not want to do anything on Sabbath, on Saturday. And so sometimes crucifixion could take a very long time to kill somebody. In fact, historical records show us that some people stayed on the cross for many days. And so the Jews wanted to take the bodies down, wanted to get rid of the bodies, and so the Romans took care of the job in a horrible way. It says that they broke the legs of the two criminals, one on Jesus' side. The reason they did that was that would hasten death, because they weren't able to lift themselves up and breathe anymore, and they would die rather quickly. It says that they did not break the bones of Jesus, and in not breaking those bones, they fulfilled several Old Testament prophecies that required the perfect sacrifice not to have any broken bones or blemishes, but also specifically Psalm 34:20 that says that God's special sacrifice, God's special Messiah, would not have his bones broken. However, it says that the Romans went to Jesus looking at him, suspecting that he was dead, wanted to make sure, so they pierced him in the side with a spear. He didn't move. They knew he was dead. And they didn't realize it, but they were also fulfilling another prophecy from Zechariah chapter 12, verse 10, that says he would be pierced in his side for us. Jesus is dead. They're able to bring him down from the cross. And it ends up that a secret follower, his name is Joseph of Arimathea, he volunteered to use his tomb to bury the body of Jesus Christ. He was a secret admirer and follower. He was a very prestigious, he was a wealthy person. He was a political person, being part of the Sanhedrin. And it says right after the crucifixion account that he would take the body of Jesus. And by the way, by entombing Jesus' body in his tomb, it also fulfilled a prophecy in the book of Isaiah 53 verse 9 that says that Messiah would be buried along with the rich. Now there's an apocryphal story about Joseph of Arimathea's wife. Apocryphal means it's probably not true, but it's fun to tell. It's a modern apocryphal story that says that when Joseph's wife learned that Joseph had given his tomb to Jesus, she was upset about it. But Joseph said to his wife, "Don't worry. Jesus said he's only going to need it for the weekend." Okay, terrible joke, but you get one terrible joke from me. Now, after Jesus died, he's put in the tomb. It says right afterwards in chapter 20 of John, right after the crucifixion account, it leaps right over Saturday and goes to Sunday, and it says that Mary Magdalene on the first day of the week, one of the followers of Jesus, went to the tomb, saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance, and Jesus was God. I just want to comment about that for a moment. That is a remarkable description of what happened on Easter Sunday. That it was women, and each of the Gospels are consistently telling us it was women, different women, who went to the tomb, noticed that Jesus was gone, and they were the first to testify of Jesus' resurrection. Why is that important? Because we need to remember that 2,000 years ago, women were not well thought of or well treated. They were basically not considered much more than property, and their testimony and their witness was not acceptable the way men's testimony were. And so had the disciples decided to make up these stories about Jesus' resurrection, why didn't they use, say, Roman soldiers or religious leaders, or why didn't they use themselves? They would not have used women if their effort was to pull a fast one and convince people of this resurrection of their master Jesus. The use of women is just another example of why we trust the reliability of the gospel accounts. Had the gospels been made up, they certainly would not have used women to tell the story. So let's go back to Saturday. Jesus is in the tomb, what goes on there? And there's a lot of speculation by theologians and churches as to what happened on the day of the Saturday when Jesus was in the tomb. I'm going to just share the obvious and most natural thing that occurred there. I'm going to suggest it was the Sabbath and Jesus rested. And I want us to remember that there is a pattern of this finishing and resting throughout the whole Old Testament. The Gospel of John is not a very Jewish document. It's a rather Greek secular document in terms of the language and its approach and its arguments. However, John loves the book of Genesis. And you remember the first book of the Bible is Genesis, and the first verse, it says this: "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." In the beginning. What's the first verse in the book of John? The Gospel of John begins in chapter 1, verse 1. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." And we learn a few verses later that the Word is referring to Jesus Christ. John is lifting language from the book of Genesis to tell his version of the gospel. And so I want us to think about this idea again of completeness, finishing, and resting, and going back to Genesis chapter 2. Genesis chapter 2 kind of summarizes everything after God has created everything. It says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were," here's the word, "finished," or created, "in their vast array, and by the seventh day God had finished the work he had been doing, and so on the seventh day he rested from all his work." On the seventh day, which by the way is a very long day, he completed his work. His creation work is finished. And by the way, it's the only day that does not have this phrase, "there was morning and evening," which sort of ended these earlier days. Here this day is rather indefinite. God rested from his work. The main point is you have a sense of finishing. God finished creation, and then he rested. Get the pattern going on? Finishing the work and then resting. There's more. The Old Testament looks at the Israelites leaving Egypt. heading towards Canaan or the promised land. And it took them 40 years to get there. But they finally entered the promised land, and the Bible uses this language, that they entered into God's rest. They entered into rest. The promised land is also called rest. They worked, they labored for 40 years to get there, and then they entered into this rest. The New Testament, so that's our third example. The last example is that the New Testament, in the book of Hebrews chapter 4, picks up this imagery of the people of God moving from work to rest in chapter 4. And it says that there remains, in verse 9, a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their works, just as God did from his. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest. And so we see the people of God moving from Egypt to the promised land, going from works to rest, completing their works, going to rest. And now we are told as believers that we can enter into God's rest, into God's fellowship, into God's friendship, where we finish our works as well. And so I want to close and talk about what Saturday should mean to us, the Saturday of Easter weekend. God completed his work, and he ceased from that work. He rested. Not that he needed rest, but he completed his work. Jesus completed his work, and he said, it is finished, it's completed, and he rested. The people of God in the Old Testament finished their work of leaving Egypt, fighting their way through the desert after 40 years, and then entering the promised land. Some of them did, not all of them. In fact, a very small group did compared to the beginning group. And finally, we are told that we can enter into God's rest and that we cease from our works. And so there are two things going on here. First of all, there is, of course, the eternal rest. We believe that we will rest with God, be with God forever. In existence and eternity, there's different words for eternal life, heaven. It's indescribable of being in fellowship with God forever. But that rest also begins here and now when we stop thinking that our own works, our own efforts, our own religion, our own giving or serving or fasting and praying is going to somehow make God more predisposed to love us and accept us. He loves us, he receives us, he takes us into personal fellowship with him based solely on the finished work of Jesus Christ, who puts his punctuation mark on that event on Friday when he says, it is finished. So my friends, stop striving, stop trying to earn, stop trying to impress God. Just receive him, let him receive you, live for him, with him by faith. And thank you for watching today. Have a great Easter Saturday. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. 10 o'clock live service. It'll be recorded so you can watch it later. But live at 10 o'clock will be our Easter service this year. Have a great day. God bless you and keep you.